Welcome to my channel. Let me introduce myself. I'm Pilgrim and neither a historian nor a scholar of any kind, but simply interested in history in general and Gothic architecture in particular. Although I will try my best to make sure the information presented in this video is accurate, you should keep that in mind and take everything I will tell you with a grain of salt. If you feel the need to place me in a category, you could call me an overzealous tourist, hence the nickname Pilgrim. For all the places I will be showing you on here, I have visited myself. Therefore, the vast majority of pictures have also been taken by me, and although I mostly use Wikipedia as a source of information, I also collect information on site, which I believe to be more reliable. So look at this as a travel report by an enthusiast, showing you things he likes. That does sound about right. I also feel the need to point out that English is not my native language. Therefore, there will be mistakes, especially concerning my pronunciation. Of course, I will try to improve on that as we go along. If you happen to discover any mistakes, factual or otherwise, feel free to let me know in the comments. With that out of the way, let's get started. Today I will be taking you back to the Dark Ages, but before we begin our journey, try to get into the right state of mind. For not only will it enable you to get the most out of it, but also increase your chances to comprehend what I'm about to show you. For knowledge is nothing without understanding. You may be of a different faith or no faith at all, and of course I'm not trying to change that. I'm merely trying to tell you a story. So, for the sake of argument, I ask you to leave the cradle you are in and try a different one. Just for a little while. Forget all you think you know. Forget reason and science. Forget your doubts and fears, for there is purpose to your existence. You know how the world works and your place in it, for there is an almighty God providing law and order. He guides you, he watches over you, and you will see him soon. There is no doubting his power, for he is absolute. Everything under the sun is his domain, and his reign is eternal. Welcome to God's kingdom. In this video we will be looking at Gothic architecture at the Upper Rhine. 3 churches in particular, to be more precise. Basel Minster in Switzerland, Freiburg Minster in Germany, and Strasbourg Cathedral in France. At first glance the selection may appear random, however it is anything but. There are, as a matter of fact, a lot of commonalities between those 3 buildings. So many actually that I tend to refer to them as the 3 sisters. So, let's look at those commonalities first. Most obvious, there's the building material. All 3 structures are comprised of sandstone. Red sandstone, for the most part, which is local material, as both the German Black Forest as well as the French Vosges Mountains, which are nearby, have large deposits of sandstone, which is also known as bunter sandstone or Buntsandstein in German, which translates to colored or colorful sandstone. While the use of local material naturally is a logical choice, it is especially typical for buildings of that time, which brings us to the next commonality, the building period. Basel Minster was built between the year 1019 and 1500 AD, Freiburg Minster between 1200 and 1513, and Strasbourg Cathedral between 1176 and 1439. The building period of Strasbourg Cathedral is taken from the French and German Wikipedia pages, while the English page lists the building period as from 1015 until 1439. This difference of more than 100 years may appear stark, but actually isn't. The fact you have to consider is that not only were these churches built over a prolonged period of time, they were also repaired and rebuilt quite a lot. In addition, they were built on top of their predecessors, which were sometimes incorporated, at least in part, into the new structure, so dating them can be quite a handful. However, since I am certain that nothing of the 1015 build remains above ground, and Strasbourg Cathedral happens to be a French church, we'll go with the French Wikipedia date of 1176 to 1439. It does not matter too much anyway, since it places all 3 churches squarely within the period of time known today as the Middle Ages. The High Middle Ages, for the most part. Therefore, all 3 buildings are true medieval structures. Which brings us to the next point, locations, as in countries. Like I mentioned before, all 3 churches are located in different countries. at least today, those being Switzerland, Germany and France. However, back when they were first built, this was not the case. While France did not stretch that far east yet, Switzerland and Germany did not even exist. At least not in any kind of state we would recognize today. Instead, all three cities, Basel, Freiburg and Strasbourg, used to be part of the Holy Roman Empire. Therefore, all three of these churches were Holy Roman Empire churches. The Holy Roman Empire is a very complex and extremely complicated subject, so I cannot explain it in detail at the moment. Here is what is most important in a nutshell. The Holy Roman Empire is not to be confused with the Roman Empire of antiquity. It is an entirely different kettle of fish. However, the resemblance in name to the Roman Empire was intentional, as the empire claimed to be the Roman Empire itself, or at the very least, its direct continuation. In the early 16th century, the name was changed to Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, which finally gives us a rough idea what we are dealing with. The Holy Roman Empire existed for about a millennia. During that time, its territory shifted considerably. While it included parts of modern-day eastern France, western Poland and northern Italy, its main body was mostly comprised of Czechia, Austria, the Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, Slovenia, Luxembourg and, especially, Germany. This is the reason the Holy Roman Empire is often explained as the medieval Germany, although a gross oversimplification and therefore, strictly speaking, incorrect. It's the only way to describe what the Holy Roman Empire was in short order. Let me be clear about one thing. I'm not saying that all three of these churches were originally German, explicitly not implicating nor encouraging the conclusion that they once were German and therefore should be again. I resolutely resent historical revisionism in any way, shape or form. We are not doing that here. Let's leave that sort of enterprise to Vladimir Putin. He's way better at it anyway. What I'm trying to do instead is attempting to explain to you a small piece of European history, which is extremely complicated and interwoven, in a nutshell. The best description I can give you is the following. Yes, today Basel Minster is a Swiss church, Freiburg Minster a German one, and Strasbourg Cathedral French. However, historically speaking, it makes much more sense to refer to them as churches of their respective cities rather than countries. Cities which used to be largely independent entities at times, but were still part of a larger political body known as the Holy Roman Empire. It is my hope that, by pointing this out, I can help people to understand our common cultural roots and relations as Europeans, and therefore promote understanding and friendship between our various nations. Now, that was quite a mouthful, and we have diverged from our original topic a fair deal. Back to it, and a much more easily explained commonality. All three churches, despite being referred to as Münster in the German language, are actually cathedrals. What exactly is a cathedral anyway? We have all heard the term. Usually we associate it with a church that is particularly large and spectacular. But is this really it? Or is there anything else to it? Yes, actually, it turns out that there is. As a matter of fact, the designation cathedral has nothing to do with the architecture of the church in question, nor its size. It is, basically, a designation of rank within the church, the Roman Catholic Church in this case, with a cathedral containing the seat, cathedra in Latin, of a bishop, hence the term cathedral. Now, with bishops being important figures within the Roman Catholic Church, the churches they usually designate to be their seats tend to be big and impressive. However, to be fair, in large part this is also simply due to necessity, as the church in question needs to be able to seat as many people as possible, while also being in a central location at the same time. As far as Basel Minster is concerned, Basel was founded as a cathedral from the very start. However, today it is not a Catholic church any longer, but a Protestant one instead. So, strictly speaking, it isn't a cathedral anymore either. But since we are looking at it mostly from a historical perspective, we will still refer to it as such from time to time. We will do just the same for yet another commonality, which is the result of the tradition within the Catholic Church to dedicate churches to specific entities, usually saints. In case of Basel, Freiburg and Strasbourg, we are talking about the same entity in fact, which is Mary, Mother of Jesus, also known as Virgin Mary, Blessed Virgin Mary, Saint Mary, Queen Mary or the Mother of God. As with the cathedral status, technically this does not apply to Basel Minster anymore. But with that pointed out, we will still regard her as such, since this is how it was originally intended. Moving on to the final point concerning the architectural style. While all three churches are Gothic churches, they also contain a number of Romanesque elements. The reason for that being that they were all started as Romanesque structures when building first commenced, since it used to be the dominant style before Gothic architecture emerged. Now, Gothic architecture originated in France, roughly during the middle of the 12th century. It did take a while for it to permeate to other countries. With all three of our churches not being French originally, this is why all of them were originally intended to be entirely Romanesque. Even Freiburg Minster, which started construction the latest, at a time when the Gothic style was already picking up speed in France. However, moving forward, all three churches would become more and more Gothic as construction and time progressed, ending up as almost entirely Gothic churches when they were finally completed and remain so to this very day. After this lengthy explanation, it is finally time to take a closer look at the individual churches themselves, starting with Basel Minster. Now, the first thing you realize, as soon as you lay eyes on it, is the fact that it's actually quite small. Considering this is a Gothic cathedral, you would certainly expect something bigger. This picture has been taken from a bridge mid-river and is pretty favorable in fact, since there are no buildings blocking the view from this side. Yet, the Minster hardly stands out from the city surrounding it, certainly not to a considerable degree. There is actually a reason for that, so let's dive into this right away. Remember when I said that all three of these churches were started as Romanesque buildings? The thing is, Basel was not only started as a Romanesque building, it was also finished in that style. Since Romanesque churches usually tended to be smaller than Gothic ones, Basel Minster ended up being somewhat small as well. So, why is it a Gothic church today? Because there was a major earthquake in 1356, destroying large part of the city as well as the Minster. Thus, when they rebuilt it, they did so using the newer Gothic style, but kept the overall dimensions of the previous Romanesque structure. Yes, they increased the size somewhat, but not considerably, hence making the change in style more of a repair, a facelift, so to speak, rather than an entirely new build, which, ironically, also means that Basel Minster, despite being the oldest of the three, can just as well be seen as the youngest, thanks to said extensive repair. Looking at the western facade, there are a number of things we can take away from it. First, it's a twin tower facade, with the left one being dedicated to St. George, as indicated by his statue at the base. 67.3 meters in height, it is slightly taller than the other one, which is only 65.6 meters. This one is dedicated to Martin of Tours and also features an appropriate statue of said saint. We can also see that the Minster was increased in width at some point. Originally, it used to have one side aisle per side only, but was later extended to two. The difference in stone color makes this alteration fairly obvious, especially in the upper part. Just left to the main portal, the statue of the founder of the Minster can be seen. It depicts the Holy Roman Emperor Henry II holding a model of the church in his hand. Upon closer inspection, this model turns out to look very different from what the church looks like today, as it shows the Romanesque Minster after its initial completion. Moving further left towards the statue of St. George, another interesting detail can be observed. This part of the wall contains Romanesque round arches, a remaining fragment of masonry from before the earthquake. Moving around to the left, the transept comes into view, featuring a Romanesque round arch window in its side. But that is just the start. Upon closer inspection, there are a lot more Romanesque elements present, and very elaborate ones at that. Starting at the bottom, there is the Gallus Pforte, or Gallus Portal, a Romanesque portal dated at 1185. It is said to be the oldest remaining, with sculptures decorated, Romanesque portal within the German-speaking area. Just above, also Romanesque in nature, a rose window. According to Wikipedia, however, this structure used to be wooden and was only replaced by stone during the 19th century, which is confirmed by info panels on site. Finally, on top of it all, a Gothic window. Also interesting, but easily overlooked, is the crack in the wall right to the rose window, starting just slightly below. It is made more visible by the metal brackets inserted, helping to keep the wall together. This crack was caused by the earthquake of 1356, marking this part of the minster as one of the older ones. The shift in stone color seems to indicate the wall needed to be rebuilt roughly at the height of the rose window, or maybe slightly above. During its long history, the appearance of Basel Minster changed a number of times, not only due to the extensive repair made necessary by the earthquake. Old paintings and seals bearing the image of the minster are proof of that. For example, while the church has 2 towers today, we know for sure that she used to have more. Up to 5 at one point, apparently. The 2 at the front, 1 above the crossing and 2 flanking the choir. While there is no trace of the crossing tower left, the lower part of one of the flanking towers is still visible today, as can be seen here. This painting, depicting Basel Minster from before 1356, shows at least 4. However, this info leaflet from on site indicates the presence of a tower flanking the other side of the choir as well, bringing the total up to 5. Which would make sense, as flanking towers are usually built in pairs. The leaflet dates this version of the minster at 1230, stating it to be the late Romanesque version. If you are interested in seeing the entire leaflet, I've put it into the Patreon section. It is not a high-resolution scan, but perfectly readable. Furthermore, it does come in German, French and English, so you should be able to find something that works for you. Moving around to the apse, an ensemble of Romanesque and Gothic elements comes into view, with the Romanesque ones being located in the lower half and the Gothic ones on top. Unlike the rose window in the transept, these are, very distinctively, Gothic ones. As a rule of thumb, it can be said that, usually, parts are newer the higher or more outwards we go, with the older ones positioned lower and more to the center of the building. In the case of sandstone, older stones are usually darker as well, but this is not necessarily the case and can also be falsified by being in a spot more exposed to the elements or due to cleaning work. Not part of the minster itself, but still interesting, are the black stones incorporated into the cobblestones at the bottom of this picture. This has been done to outline the position of the exterior crypt of one of the previous iterations of the building, the one from the 9th century to be more precise. Moving towards the Gothic pointed arch, Romanesque rounded ones also come into view, marking this far section as one of the older ones around. This also leads us towards the cloister, of which Basel has 2. But before we visit those, here is a closer look at the section in between, featuring several richly decorated gravestones, both above the arches as well as behind, with the ones in the back presumably older, as they are in an older style. As a matter of fact, Basel has a lot of them, and we will come across some more while we make our round. This is quite normal, by the way, as churches are usually used as burial sites for people of importance. Clerical as well as worldly leaders were regularly buried in churches during the Middle Ages. This was not only done to highlight their status, but also to ensure them a place in heaven, or so it was hoped. To the left, one of the 2 cloisters can be seen, this being the smaller one. We will continue to move into that direction to take a quick look. Flanked by gravestones, with yet another one on the floor. We better be careful not to trip. Here we are. It really is a nice place to visit. If you happen to be in the area, I recommend you do just that. Next, we will cross the cloister and take a position on the opposite side, looking to the right, relative to where we are standing at the moment. This position puts us behind the minster, with our line of sight running parallel to it. You can see the large cloister straight ahead with the exit at the end. Moving forward just a bit, turning right, this is the direction from which we entered. You can easily trace it back by following the rounded arches that continue on from a point of entry towards where we currently are. Just behind them, the Gothic windows of the large cloister can be seen, showing some lovely, sophisticated tracery. So let's take a closer look at those. The windows, as well as the rib vault, are both from the late Gothic period, as suggested by the level of complexity. We will look through the window roughly in the center of this picture next. This is the part of the cloister that runs parallel to the minster. What we see here is the other side of the transept, the southern one. The window containing the Star of David is called the Christusfenster, which roughly translates to Window of Christ. The reason for this name will become obvious once we look at it from the inside. Staying at the same window, just changing the angle, the nave and both twin towers come into view. It also reveals that the cloister is not rectangular, as you would expect, but roughly in the shape of the letter U, with the missing side occupied by the minster itself. We will now move further left, looking down the hallway that is the last section of the cloister we have not seen yet, just visible to the bottom left. And here we are. The exit is just out of frame to the left-hand side, with another one down the hallway also to the left, while the door on the opposite side leads into the minster itself. We will now move down this hallway and turn left. Looking up, this neat example of stone masonry can be seen. It casts a faint shadow on the ceiling above, since it isn't connected to it, therefore serving purely decorative purposes. But now it is time to leave the cloister behind and return to the cathedral herself. At this point we have come full circle. We are almost back to the front where we started. There is, however, one final thing I would like to mention before we enter. It concerns the extension of the Basel Minster from one side aisle per side to two. If you look at the upper part of the nave, you can see the windows of the clerestory just below the roof. They are shaped in the Romanesque round arched fashion. Directly below, the shed roof of the original side aisle can be seen. Going lower, a series of small round windows follow, followed by yet another type of window, barely visible, that the last and lowest roof cuts into. A clear indication that the outer section has been added as an afterthought and was not intended from the start. As we enter the minster, we come across a small shop in the entrance area, creating a bit of a choke point. While the visit to the church itself is free, souvenirs and guides can be purchased here, as well as tickets for the towers, but more on that later. Stepping into the nave, looking into the direction of the altar, we catch a glimpse of a number of stained glass windows. Fortunately for us, Basel Minster has a lot of them. Almost all of the windows are colorful stained glass ones. However, they are all new. None of them are from the Middle Ages. We will come back to that in a bit. Looking at the interior structure, we have somewhat of a reversal of what we saw earlier at the apse. In here, the lowest row of pillars, called an arcade, was executed as Gothic pointed arches, while the matroneum above and the clerestory on top are Romanesque in nature. This is also where we can find one of the finer pieces of stone masonry the Basel Minster has to offer. I'm talking about the sandstone pulpit to the left. It was added during the 15th century and is a remarkable example of excellent craftsmanship. Note how the artist managed to make the brittle material look flexible by sculpting some of the parts in the center in a fashion as if they would bend outwards. Moving on to our first stained glass window. I have selected this one to start with because it shows the founder of Basel Minster, Henry II, together with his wife. Both hold a model of the cathedral in their hands, once again a Romanesque one, distinctively different from how the church looks like today. As I pointed out already, it is a relatively recent window, the depiction too sophisticated and detailed to be a product of the Middle Ages. On a quick side note, do any of you happen to like Rammstein? Yes? Well, in that case you're in luck, as you can visit him here in Basel Minster. You didn't see that one coming, did you? Moving on for now. This is the view you get from standing inside the northern half of the transept, looking south. Directly opposite, the Christusfenster can be seen. Let's take a moment to zoom in on that. As you can see, the window is in the same style as the one we previously looked at. There's also an inscription at the bottom. It reads, Die Zünfte und Gesellschafter der Stadt Basel. This roughly translates to the guilds and company members of the city of Basel, marking it as a window that was gifted to the Minster by said organizations. The letters following being the year that took place in, written in Roman numerals. M, D, C, 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 L, Y, I, I. The M being 1000, the D 500, the C 100, the L 50, the V 5, and the two I's, each representing a 1, therefore making it a 2. So 1000 plus 500 plus 100 plus 100 plus 100 plus 50 plus 5 plus 2, which adds up to 1857 AD. Fairly recent, like I said. Given that the rest of the windows are in the same style as this one, I assume that most of them, if not all, are from around this time. This is just me speculating though. Moving on to the choir, we get to see a lot more of those beautiful stained glass windows. Romanesque ones without tracery at the bottom, and Gothic ones with tracery at the first and second level. The choir usually is the most decorated area of a church, and to an extent, this is also the case here. Next, we will visit someone special. I tend to do that when I happen to be in the vicinity. We do not need to go far, it is just out of frame at the bottom left. This is Gertrud Anna von Habsburg, a Roman German queen, and her son Karl von Habsburg. Sadly, her son passed away at a young age, a couple of years before she did, and they were buried here together. Just in case you ask yourself why a Roman German queen would be buried in Switzerland, I refer you to my introduction, where I talked about the Holy Roman Empire. Of particular interest to us are the coats of arms on the front side of the sarcophagus. The left one representing Austria, and the one in the middle with the black eagle on yellow field, the Holy Roman Empire. As to the one on the right with the dragon on it, unfortunately I am not familiar with this one. A relation to the family ancestry seems likely. Be that as it may, some of you are probably surprised to see the coat of arms of Austria on here as well. Despite the fact that Germany and the German-speaking areas are usually historically associated with Prussia, this does not hold up for southern Germany and its neighboring regions. Those were, traditionally, either part or allies of Austria. Although Prussia would ultimately defeat Austria and take a dominant role in what would later be known as Germany, between the two of them Austria is the much older power, the proof being right in front of you, with the year of death of Queen Gertrud given as 1281. Back then, Prussia wasn't even around and therefore unable to challenge anyone. I should however add that the remains of Queen Gertrud are not here any longer. Both she and her son have been moved to another location at some point in time, making this a cenotaph, an empty grave. I don't know why they were moved. Maybe her presence was seen as inappropriate at a later date. It still is a very interesting historical footnote in any case. Turning around, looking in the direction of the western facade, we can take a glimpse at the pipe organ. Most unfortunately, they decided to go with a modern design that does not do the Minster justice. More interesting is the platform the instrument is placed on. This used to be the church's rood screen. In case you do not know what a rood screen is, medieval churches used to have a barrier separating the choir, which was reserved for the clergy only, from the rest of the church. This barrier is called a rood screen. However, as time moved on, this sort of separation was increasingly seen as antiquated. Therefore, said barriers were either opened up or removed entirely. In the case of Basel Minster, it changed position and now serves as platform for the pipe organ. Now, most of what we have seen in here so far was fairly new. Let me direct your attention to yet another thing that is, which would be the very floor we are standing on. You may not have noticed until now, but it sure is remarkably smooth for a church of this age. Of course it can only be like that because it is new. 20th century in fact. There is a good reason for it, and we will come to that in a second, when we will finally be looking at some very old stuff. For that, follow me through this Romanesque arc into the crypt. As we enter, you are immediately able to realize that the wall, especially on the left, gets a lot rougher as it is much older. The paintings on the ceiling are very interesting as well. As far as I know, they actually are from medieval times. Note the difference in style and sophistication in comparison to the stained glass windows we looked at earlier. They clearly are less developed. Moving around the corner, we are now in between two late Romanesque pillars, facing towards the center of the crypt, thus in line with the main body of the church. But we can go deeper still, so we will. The doorway leading us there is just about visible behind the most right of the four central pillars. There it is. The sign on the left-hand side reads Krypta unter der Vierung, crypt below the crossing. Let's head straight in. Now is the time to explain why the floor inside the minster is that new. It's quite simple. There was an archaeological excavation undertaken. Therefore, the entire floor needed to be removed and replaced with a new one after they were done. Some of the results of the excavation can be seen here. Like this painting, for example. Luckily in this case there is no need to guess, since there is a description right above. It translates to Late Gothic scene from the Passion of Christ, 14th/15th century. But there's more, like the sarcophagus. The text translating as follows: Reused sarcophagus, 7th to 8th century. The oldest artifact we have seen so far, by a considerable margin. At this point we have left the Holy Roman Empire behind and are now dealing with Francia, the kingdom of the Franks. Reusing older items is actually quite common, by the way. It used to happen a lot, especially as far as Roman goods were concerned. Remember, the Holy Roman Empire pretended to be the Roman Empire itself. As a result, they were very keen on incorporating Roman artifacts into their own arsenal. This is not only true for the Holy Roman Empire though. The Franks did the same thing, for the same reason: continuity and claim to power. Here's another element for you. A piece of Carolingian foundation from 820 AD. The Carolingians being a Frankish dynasty, the most famous one in fact, thanks to their most prominent member, King Charlemagne, known in the German language as Karl der Große, meaning Charles the Great. If we were to go back in time just 340 additional years, we would have reached the time of the actual Roman Empire of antiquity. Meaning the episcopal see would not be located in Basel anymore, but in the Roman city of Augusta Raurica instead, whose ruins are located just 10 minutes away. It's a great place to visit, but that will have to wait for now. My apologies for the bad quality of the picture, by the way. Lighting is very problematic down here. But we are done now anyway. Time to head back up. Leaving the crypt on the opposite side, we can see a door down the hallway. This one leads into one of the two twin towers. If you want to climb the tower, this is the way to go. It is locked though. The employees at the souvenir shop will open it up for you after you have purchased a ticket. It's a modest fee. The last time I visited it was 6 Swiss francs. Make sure to bring at least one other person though, for they do not let you enter on your own. Believe me, I tried. Apparently the reason for this is that someone who entered alone at some point used the opportunity to commit suicide by jumping. I can see the problem, as the temptation for someone mentally unstable to do just that must be considerable, since the towers are not well secured. Not by today's standards anyway. For the railing is just as high as it used to be in the Middle Ages, which isn't very high at all. So make sure you are not afraid of heights before going up. You need to be nimble on your feet as well, for the stairs are very steep and narrow, even compared to the staircases of other medieval churches. However, once you have made it all the way up, the view is excellent. This is the view looking east, roughly east at least. During the Middle Ages, churches were usually built facing east, the facade facing west and the choir facing east, that is, into the direction of the sunrise. Like this floor plan shows, Basel Minster is slightly off as far as its orientation is concerned. By a considerable margin in fact, as it faces northeast. The reason for this is unknown to me. It could very well be geological. But whatever the case, it makes the church pointing almost exactly towards my hometown. While the key on it is a bit problematic to read, since 3 of the colors are way too similar, it still provides us with some additional information concerning the age of different parts of the minster. While the exact age of the northern tower is hard to determine, we can at least see that they are not from the same time. Furthermore, the pulpit is clearly marked as from the 15th century, as are both of the cloisters, while the Romanesque arches in between are older, just as we suspected. A small extension, right-hand side to the church's southern transept, is also marked as being from the 15th century. And indeed, we can see the difference in stone color, forming a clear edge with our very eyes. Just in case you are wondering, these pictures are not all from the same day. Since I can't go up the tower whenever I want, I needed to improvise a little bit. My apologies. This is the large cloister, as seen from the other tower. The river is, of course, the Rhine, forming a curve. It changes direction in Basel, from flowing east to west to flowing south to north approximately. We will follow it shortly. But before we do, here is one last picture showing the very top of the southern tower, which is the one dedicated to Saint Martin. They are difficult to see from the ground due to perspective, which is a shame, for they are very elegant. A good example of how well developed the craft stone masonry was at the time. We will see more of that as we move to our next location, Freiburg im Breisgau. Freiburg is approximately 1 hour north of Basel. Its full designation, Freiburg im Breisgau, is used to differentiate it from Freiburg, which is located within the French-speaking part of Switzerland, and yet another town, also called Freiburg, in France. Now feast your eyes on this, for this is the Cathedral of Freiburg im Breisgau. It should be obvious at first glance, even to the ignorant, that this is another kind of beast entirely. No mere repair of a former Romanesque structure, but a building, although started in the Romanesque style, breaking free from it quite soon to defy gravity in a way only Gothic architecture can. Standing 116 meters tall, Freiburg's main tower dwarfs Basel and is famous throughout the world among historians. For Freiburg has a unique distinction. Finished in 1330, its spire was the first one to utilize an open structure like this, the first in the world. It is not the only tower the place has to offer though, for there are 2 more flanking the choir on either side, currently out of view. Despite the fact that Freiburg is younger than Basel in theory, in practice the opposite is true. For, unlike Basel, Freiburg has never been destroyed and therefore never needed to be rebuilt entirely. As a result, Freiburg Minster has preserved its medieval nature far better. Of course there are renovations going on all the time, like you can see here. Such is the nature of that kind of building. Basically, this is as good as it's going to get. The perfect time to take a look at it. So we will. Like I mentioned earlier, the Gothic style was born in France. It took about a century for that technique to make it to the Holy Roman Empire, and the people utilizing it had to learn on the job. Built from 1200 to 1513, the development of the skills of the architects and craftsmen involved can be seen with remarkable clarity, making it feel like traveling through time as we go along. Looking at the side facing north, we can see that the transept, with its round arched windows, is still Romanesque in nature. It is, in fact, the oldest remaining part of the building. The first window to its right is an early Gothic one, pointed arched, but without any tracery. The one next to it already has some, even it is very rough still. Moving on to the next one, the tracery is getting more delicate. 4 windows, 4 steps of development. It is quite fascinating. Yes, the Romanesque transept has a small Gothic window at its bottom left, but that was put in later on. We will see proof of that as we go along. There is also a large late Gothic one at its bottom right. This one, however, is quite easy to explain, as it is located slightly forward to the transept, marking it as a later addition as well. It is somewhat difficult to see the position at this angle, but you can easily tell upon closer inspection. The small balcony on top is a dead giveaway in this case. The same is true for the 2 small extensions made to the side aisle. One in front of the early Gothic window just to the right of the transept, and the other one even further to the right. Remember what I told you at Basel, for it applies even more so in Freiburg. The general tendency is such that particular sections tend to be newer and therefore more developed the higher and the more outwards they are located. Here you can see the difference of a Romanesque portal and a Gothic one by direct comparison. We are now moving around the choir and the outlying chapel surrounding it to the side facing south, currently bathed in sunlight. There's a lot to unpack here, the southern face of the transept being especially interesting. As I said several times already, the Romanesque style predates the Gothic one. However, I haven't mentioned what came after, which would be the Renaissance. Here we have the opportunity to observe all three of these styles at once. With the transept itself and the lower part of the flanking tower being Romanesque, the nave and the upper part of the tower early to high Gothic, the choir to the right late Gothic, and the porch Renaissance. An exquisite example of a diverse mixture that, yet somehow, was made to work in conjunction, which is nothing short of astonishing. With a notable shift in stone color, one would think that the dividing line on the tower should be obvious enough, and yet you still only spot it once you know it is there. Now, one question may have come to your mind while we were looking at this. How come that the transept is in the oldest style? Should it not be the choir? Isn't that the part that is built first and therefore should be the oldest? With the development going from the far right to the left? You are quite right, my friends. Indeed, the choir is what usually is built first. There are exceptions, of course. However, Freiburg Cathedral is not among them. The choir was built first, in late Romanesque style, just like the transept. So, what happened? Well, after they were finished with the place, they tore the choir down again to rebuild it in late Gothic fashion, leaving the transept the only notable Romanesque part to remain. Therefore the choir, which is supposed to be the oldest section of the church, turns out to be the youngest instead. A complete reversal of circumstances, which is exactly the kind of thing that is so fascinating about this field. It's like solving a mysterious ancient puzzle. Stimulating, to say the least. However, once you do figure it out, you come to realize that this sort of thing is actually quite common, with the choir of a church basically being its special place. It receives a greater level of attention as it is, and normally being the oldest part as well, it is due to renovation and repair sooner than all the rest anyway. With that out of the way, we will now focus on the nave, especially the side aisle, and take a closer look at those. Just like on the other side, the development can be traced very clearly and also on both levels, side aisle and clerestory. Of course the direction is reversed now, due to us standing on the other side, but that is about it. Apart from that, it is the same. The best example of an improvement in skill being the two side aisle windows in the center. The general shape basically being identical, but the right one ending up thicker and without fine detail. The same can be said for the railing above, each of the respective windows, and, yet again, for the windows of the clerestory as well. Up there the jump from what can roughly be considered high Gothic to late Gothic is made without transition, suggesting the craftsmen learned all they needed to by finishing the lower part first. Be that as it may, it also is a good opportunity to look at the support structure, the flying buttresses and buttresses so widely associated with Gothic architecture. With that being the case, they are, in fact, no necessity for any structure to be classified as Gothic, but they are required here for aesthetic reasons. It is one of the achievements of the style that it managed to turn this necessity into a virtue by transforming what basically is a mere support structure into a unique work of art. Or, to put it more eloquently, an arrangement of countless pieces of art working in conjunction to fulfill an essential function while also merging into a massive, stunning creation much larger than the sum of its parts. For, as wasteful as it may look for some, I assure you nothing you see here is. Everything has a purpose, the one of the flying buttresses and buttresses being the most obvious. The same holds true for the statues, the tracery and the gargoyles as well. For the statues, especially the ones on top, add weight to the buttresses, helping to stabilize them, while the tracery on top of the flying buttresses covers and thus protects the drainage underneath, with the gargoyles finally spewing the rainwater as far away from the foundation of the building as possible. since its medieval creators understood fairly well what problem an extremely soaked underground would cause for their work. True, all of these elements could be just rough pieces of stone, devoid of any decorative purpose. But such is the beauty of Gothic architecture, that they are not. After all, why build a structure to serve a single purpose when you can fashion it to serve several at the same time? Would that not be the real tragedy instead? Thoughtlessness and carelessness in the highest degree? For now, it does three things at once: the physical support, the storytelling part, as well as the psychological one. For who living and breathing with a beating heart in his chest could not be struck down with astonishment and awe by looking at the skill and beauty unfolding before us, except for the most mindless of creatures? Believe it or not, I was once such a person. Almost, at least. Back when I was very young. I was born in Freiburg, and Freiburg Cathedral was the first Gothic cathedral I ever laid eyes upon. I did not know anything, nor did I understand what I was looking at. But I was impressed, and that impression stayed with me. Of course, we visited the church as part of a school excursion. We were young, impatient and bored soon enough. But Freiburg Minster has something to offer for everyone, even bored youngsters, for every class visiting has at least one fun moment. The moment they find this very special Wasserspeier. Yes, your eyes do not deceive you, it is exactly what you think it is, a guy sticking out his butt. Enjoy! I hope you had a good laugh, for life is all about the little joys. But now we will be a bit more serious again as we continue. However, we are finished with the exterior now. For the moment. Here is one last look at the front tower before we head inside via the main gate. As we enter, we encounter a rich ensemble of statues and paintings, most notably the Virgin Mary holding baby Jesus on the center pillar. This is a church dedicated to her, after all, therefore she deserves the most prominent spot. Basel Minster used to have one too, by the way, in exactly the same spot. Sadly, this place remains empty today, as this statue was destroyed during the Protestant Revolution. As far as the paint job is concerned, statues used to be painted in the Middle Ages. Indeed, large parts of the churches themselves were. We even know of entire facades who were decorated in this manner. But the paint usually does not survive that long. I don't know if these paintings, as well as the color on the statues, is still the original one. A restoration halfway through seems more likely, but it is great that it is there in any case. Now that we are finally inside, you might agree to my earlier statement that Freiburg preserved its medieval flair way better than Basel did. The first impression is quite primal. Not only is it darker, but also rougher overall, and the room layout less sophisticated and yet more cluttered at the same time, at least as far as the nave is concerned. As you can see, Freiburg's nave has no triforium, nor a gallery. There is nothing but barren wall between the pointed arches of the nave and the clear story, marking it as an early attempt at a Gothic church. In the case of this picture, the fact is concealed somewhat by that pipe organ. Imagine it gone and you realize the problem. There would be nothing to see on a vast surface. However, what we do get to see are some of Freiburg's remarkable medieval stained glass windows. As far as I know, those are replicas, while the originals are kept somewhere safe. It certainly would make sense to do that, especially since it does not take from the experience. Let's take a closer look at one of them. As far as I'm concerned, stained glass windows are supposed to do two things primarily: relay information and be beautiful while doing it. Both conditions are easily met here. Basically, they are medieval equivalents to modern monitors. Telling a story using pictures rather than words does make more sense from a psychological point of view, as pictures have a stronger impact on people. Considering that a large part of the population could not read back then, it makes even more sense. They are also advertisements to a degree, as they were usually gifted to the church by either wealthy individuals or guilds and would therefore bear their coat of arms. Like this one does. It is the scissor on the red field that can be found at the bottom of the center section, as well as on the left and right top. As far as the age of this window is concerned, I would guess that it is among the older ones present, high Middle Ages, presumably. Notice how simple and highly stylized the facial features of the people depicted are compared to Basel. They all look the same, like dolls, which is typical for that time. I enjoy it all the same. Moving on just a little bit further, we come across this. Now, some of you might consider it to be a bust, but what it actually is a reliquary, which means a container for a relic. Since it comes in the form of a bust, this indicates that it is likely to contain a fragment of a saint's skull. Reliquaries are often elaborately decorated, just like this one, and, although by no means exclusively Catholic, still typical for it. When it comes down to it, basically all Roman Catholic churches of any significance contain at least one. As for this particular piece, unfortunately I do not know which saint it belongs to. Sometimes people ask me why I like churches so much. Well, of course I do not care about all of them to the same degree. It's mostly the special ones that catch my attention. Funny enough, many of them are. Trying to summarize it, I'm interested in history and value art and beauty, all of which is plentiful in a good cathedral. The Gothic cathedral, for one, represents the culmination of all crafts of the outgoing Middle Ages in their most developed form. Paintings, wood carvings, tapestries, stained glass, goldsmithing, and of course stone masonry. Most of the pieces would be marvelous on their own, but in here, not only are they present in large number, they are also arranged in a manner to achieve an amplifying effect, multiplying the impact they have on the observer. The total becomes more than the sum of its parts is a saying that is most fitting in this case. In fact, I can hardly think of another scenario it fits this well. Take this altar, for example. How many hours of work did it take to fashion it like this? Quite a few, I would guess. What about the other pieces? What about the structure itself? What about all of it? What about the alterations made as it moves forward through time? Growing, evolving, hurt, healing, ever-changing, to finally arrive in our present, yet still bearing witness of an ancient past beyond our comprehension. When I look at a building like this, I see more than just what is there now. I see beyond that. I see beneath the surface, and it fills me with awe. It makes my heart sing. And not too many things do these days. That's what I like about churches. I hope that answers your question. Moving on. Arriving at the end of the nave, we can take a closer look at the different vaults. While the nave, side aisle and transept feature a 4-part Gothic rib vault, the one of the crossing is an 8-parted one, as you would expect. The choir, on the other hand, differs considerably from both systems as it employs a net vault, which does make sense. It is the newest part, after all. Therefore, it is also the most sophisticated. Just somewhere to the right from our previous position is a little detail I want to direct your attention to. It is not the statue of the Virgin Mary, but the pillar she is placed in front of. Now, what is so special about that? I'll tell you. Do you see the group of shorter pillars placed on top of the larger ones well above the statue? Since they originally intended to go with a Romanesque building, this set of pillars turned out to be too low when they decided to switch to the Gothic style. So they addressed this issue by adding a small extension. It is an impromptu fix, but an interesting detail to note. Looking at the southern transept, just around the corner, we can see that, in addition to the Renaissance porch on the outside, there's also a Renaissance part on the inside. This is mirrored across the hall, on the northern side. But before we come to that, just a couple of numbers to put things into perspective concerning the interior dimensions of the building, since we have a good view of it right now. The side aisles are about 12.5 meters in height, with the nave reaching up to 25. Despite not being visible from the outside, Freiburg has a cupola under the crossing that is higher still, reaching up to around 30 meters. Of course, this is hardly worth mentioning if you compare it to the large cathedrals of Europe, but it is enough to achieve the desired effect. It is the largest church in town and the close vicinity, that close vicinity being considerably larger within its original medieval context, of course, which is something to consider if you start making those kind of comparisons. With that being said, let's move on to the northern transept and take a look at the Renaissance part over there. Here it is. Once again, 3 different styles back to back. The wall and upper windows being Romanesque, the oldest style, the windows just about visible at the bottom left and right being the later Gothic additions, with the Renaissance platform in the foreground representing the newest element. The story behind both of those Renaissance additions is as follows. They used to form the root screen of the Freiburg Minster before. Similar to Basel, it was relocated later on. Unlike Basel, however, it was split up and placed in the transept. This floor plan is from the German Wikipedia page of the church. It isn't merely a floor plan though, for the structure of the vault is also included, as well as the age of the different sections. Not only does this highlight the difference in complexity of the early Gothic nave at the bottom, in contrast to the late Gothic choir at the top, but also proves that the Romanesque transept in the middle really is the oldest part. Even the Gothic additions at the northern side of the Romanesque transept can be seen, showing an impressive level of detail. We will now enter the ambulatory and choir next. While the visit to the rest of the church is free, you do require a ticket for this part. The last time I visited it was €2. Is it worth it? You tell me. With this part of the church being late Gothic in nature, most of its content seems to be as well, as does the tracery of the window behind and also the window itself. If you look more closely, you can easily tell that the depiction on here is much more developed than the one on the window we looked at in the side aisle earlier. Here is yet another beautiful example of one of the side chapels for you to enjoy. Now, to be frank, I should probably add that the pieces you see in here could very well be Neo-Gothic, meaning 19th century, instead from the medieval late Gothic period, as the distinction between the two can be very difficult to identify. Basically, you have to research everything on its own in order to be sure, which, unfortunately, I do not have the time to do. Just something to keep in mind. Having rounded the choir, we will now step inside from the left-hand side, right through that gate. This is where the seat of the bishop is located. It is quite easy to figure out which chair is his, even if several should be present in approximately the same location. The most important piece in the choir, however, is the high altar. It is a winged altar piece, meaning it contains several paintings that can be revealed by folding it open. This is the closed configuration, shown around Christmas, when the picture was taken. It depicts 4 scenes, which are, from left to right, the Annunciation, the Visitation, the birth of Christ, and the flight to Egypt. The paintings are oil on wood and were made from 1512 to 1516 by Hans Baldung Grien, a German Renaissance painter who was a student of the more famous Albrecht Dürer. Going back to the cathedral itself, this is the view of the upper section of the choir, which contains some helpful information regarding the age of the segment, with 4 dates painted on the ceiling. Going from bottom to top, the first ones being 1996 and 1955, which are easy enough to read. Then it starts to get somewhat tricky. It does look like 1792. The one on top is the real deal apparently. It looks like 1410. But with a strange symbol in between the 14 and 10. ChatGPT identifies it as 1450. However, the German Wikipedia page of Freiburg Minster states that it is actually 1510, which is supposed to be the date the vault was closed, while the other years are dates of renovations. All things considered, I think Wikipedia is right on this one. Turning around, we can look across almost the entire length of the cathedral, which is 125 meters long, which, while not record-breaking, is still considerable. It also makes length and height of the building pretty close, roughly comparable in fact, with 125 meters to 116 meters, meaning the church is almost as high as it is long. I appreciate the symmetry. It also explains why the wall at the far end, being the one on the western side, is so massive. It has to support the weight of the main tower, after all. Speaking of which, you can climb it, for a small fee of €5. So I say we totally should. What do you think? In order to do this, you have to exit first though. Unlike Basel, the entrance to the tower is located on the outside, right-hand side of the main tower itself. It's the little door just behind that group of people, while the staircase itself is slightly to the left of it. You can see the entire first section of the climb in this frame. However, there are more steps after that. Once you reach the end of that first staircase, you enter the tower itself. That's about the height where you can see the railing. The viewing platform, which is the highest point you are allowed to go as a visitor, is higher still. Do you see the large Gothic window with the red steel bars sticking out at the base? That's where we are heading. As you would expect, the staircase is rather tight. Furthermore, there's only one, meaning people going up will, most likely, encounter people going down, which can be a bit uncomfortable. Unfortunately, there is, quite literally, no way around it. This is the Turmstube, meaning tower room. There are some info boards up here. You can also buy souvenirs. Historically speaking, it is likely that there was always someone on guard up here. A couple of people, probably. Some being on the lookout for fires, which, if spotted, they would relay the position to people on the ground, telling them where to go. Others would ring the bells. Being the dominant building in a medieval town, a church, like this one, used to be the ideal lookout position, which is always important, especially during wartime. Another very real, important function of a church would be to tell the time. Information we are used to take for granted now, but back then it was not. Hardly anyone had the luxury to know what time it was. At least not exactly. The only way to know for sure was to get that kind of information from the church. Either transmitted by the sound of the bells or simply looking at it. Even clocks at city halls, which are definitely a thing as well, usually made an appearance somewhat later. To underline this important fact, many churches have their historical clocks, which often are remarkable pieces of engineering as well as art, on display somewhere. In the case of Freiburg Minster, it is up here in the tower. The bells, the means of signaling the flow of time and other important events, are close by. They are kept in a separate space, above the tower parlor. They are still perfectly functional. If you happen to be in there at the right time, you will find out for yourself. Climbing higher, the staircase is no longer entirely enclosed on all sides, but starts to open up instead. It makes for an excellent view of the main body of the church, as well as both flanking towers. Freiburg Cathedral is oriented east almost perfectly. Therefore, the church is pointing at the first of many hills of the famous Black Forest. It is quite the view. Unfortunately, there were repairs going on the viewing platform at the time, meaning it was completely shrouded. Thus I can't show you a panorama view of the city. This picture, taken at the highest point of the staircase, is the best I can do for now. But do not worry, there is something much more important that I can show you. This shot has been taken standing exactly in the middle of the viewing platform, looking up into the spire, and it is glorious. What you can see here are about 46 meters of tracery, culminating in a fine point at 116 meters. And all of this was built during the Middle Ages, before 1330, mostly by hand, utilizing what we would call today only the most primitive tools and mechanisms. It is simply overwhelming. So overwhelming in fact that, in order to get a sense of scale, we need to look at it from a considerable distance. Like so. The viewing platform we were on is very easy to locate. It is right at the point where the open structure ends and the closed part of the tower starts. Standing in there, looking up, was the view I just showed you. As you can see, the open structure makes up a considerable portion of the entire tower itself. Over a third, easily. Almost 40% to be precise. A remarkable achievement. But don't take my word for it. See for yourself. Moving away even further, the entire church comes into view, allowing you to make your own estimation. Now, sadly, that open spire comes with one major downside. It enlarges the surface area of the structure exponentially, which, in combination with the softness of sandstone, makes it extremely vulnerable to any kind of detrimental factor, like bird feces, acid rain, or just regular one. Thus, these stones need to be replaced constantly, even more so than it is usually the case already, making this a maintenance nightmare. But as massive of a downside as this is, it is still outweighed by one single benefit. Just imagine a structure like this with a closed spire. It would keep the rain out, sure, but any roof terminating in such fine a point would have issues with structural stability. Many early church towers suffered from this and were prone to damage or collapse because of it, wind pressure being the decisive factor in this equation. With the church most definitely being the largest and highest building in a medieval town, its rooftops are prone to reach a height at which it will be windy most of the time. But due to its size, it won't be able to benefit from any protection provided by surrounding buildings, while any storm hitting home will only serve to compound the problem. Now, with the structure getting more and more delicate as it gains height, it becomes more difficult to support at the same time, meaning that in the area where the support is most crucial, it is also the most difficult to achieve, which is an inherent weakness of the concept itself. Many medieval church towers did not survive because of this, or were damaged as a result, and needed to be taken down. The open spire gets around that problem by denying the wind any surface area to apply pressure to. Sure, some surface is still there, but it is minimized to such a degree that not even a tornado would be able to tear it down, which Freiburg Cathedral actually proved, in a way, but more on that later. Let's focus on the Minster and the city surrounding it first. In order to do that, we will open up the distance even more, while gaining some altitude at the same time. Assuming that the buildings in the immediate vicinity of the Minster are about the same height as they used to be during the Middle Ages, and let's face it, they are likely to be at least a little bit higher today, this really puts things into perspective now, doesn't it? It certainly serves to illustrate what a monumental undertaking the construction was at the time, but we do not need to speculate, we can just take a look. Fortunately, German Wikipedia provides us with this drawing of Freiburg im Breisgau in the year of our Lord 1580, and is just as we suspected. The Minster is the largest building by far. Widest, longest, highest. Nothing comes even close to challenging it. Its dominance over the city is absolute. It also proves a different point though, one that is much more important to us, as it allows us to take a look at the state of the building at the time shortly after its first completion. That point being that Freiburg Minster did, in fact, survive in its original form. Buildings of this age hardly do, making this a most interesting and rare case indeed. Here is a direct comparison. Now, I know that scan is of a very low resolution, but despite that, all the major features can still be identified. The main tower, nave, transept, flanking towers, and the choir are all present in their current form. Just a single element is missing. In the drawing, that is. Can you spot it? Don't worry if you can't, for it is very difficult. So I'll just tell you. It's the Renaissance porch at the southern side of the transept. It was only added in 1620, thus not present when the drawing was made. That aside, the church has hardly changed in almost 5 centuries, which is nothing short of astounding. Especially considering that we came very close to losing her forever. How close, you may ask? This close. This is Freiburg in 1945. Located in the deep south and being of no military significance, the citizens of Freiburg had hoped to be spared any major air raids. But it was not to be. In November 1944, a Royal Air Force fleet of 292 heavy Lancaster bombers commenced an attack on the city, leaving the old town in ruins. It was only by the grace of God that Freiburg Minster survived. The grace of God and the open spire. Remember when I told you that Freiburg Cathedral proved that it was indeed capable of withstanding a tornado? This is when it did. Only that it wasn't a tornado or a storm, but blast waves from aerial mines and a firestorm created by the city burning down around it. It was during this time when Freiburg Minster earned yet another distinction. She had been the first church in the world to feature a tower with an open spire like this before. Now she was also the one with the last medieval Gothic church tower remaining within all of Germany as well. While the citizens of Freiburg are aware of how special their Minster is, and therefore are rightfully proud of it, they do struggle sometimes to specify what exactly it is that is so special about it, some claiming it to be the most beautiful church on earth. Which may come across as a bit of a stretch. There is, however, a very good reason for it. It all comes down to the Swiss historian Jakob Burckhardt. Mr. Burckhardt gave a lecture in 1869 talking about the main tower of the Freiburg Minster, comparing it to Basel and Strasbourg, saying, "Und Freiburg wird wohl der schönste Turm auf Erden bleiben." Meaning, and Freiburg will probably remain the most beautiful tower on earth. So, it is not hard to figure out what has transpired here, for it seems rather obvious. Mr. Burkhardt's quote has been taken out of context and changed slightly. Now, let me be clear about this. I do not suspect any kind of intent at work here, but simply inaccuracy due to information degradation. If you consider that Mr. Burkhardt only compared 3 towers, of which Freiburg came out on top, it puts things into perspective. Even the most beautiful tower on earth part is likely to be limited to that 3-tower comparison mentioned earlier, since there are only 3 open spire towers that were completed during the Middle Ages anyway. I may have come across a 4th one, but that is a topic for another time. By the way, Mr. Burkhardt's quote can be found on the German, English as well as French Wikipedia page of Freiburg Minster, at least by mid-2025. That is where I got it from. The German book Kathedralen, die schönsten Kirchbauten aus 1700 Jahren, meaning cathedrals, the most beautiful church buildings from 1700 years, by Rolf Thomann, Barbara Borngesser and Achim Bednorz, mentions a similar quote calling Freiburg den schönsten Turm der Christenheit, meaning the most beautiful tower of Christianity, although it does not mention a source for said quote. It does make its own assessment of Freiburg's tower though, calling it a milestone of architectural history, stating, seine kühne Konstruktion wie seine verfeinerte Formensprache sind ohne prominente Vorläufer kaum zu erklären. Which translates to, its bold construction and refined design language without prominent predecessors are hard to explain. As I said, I am not an expert, but that does sound like a compliment to me. With that out of the way, it is finally time to move on to our third and final cathedral, Strasbourg. Imagine you are visiting Strasbourg, just strolling through the streets randomly. All of a sudden you walk around the corner and encounter this. Then you know that someone was very serious about something. As far as height is concerned, Strasbourg outmatches Basel and Freiburg quite comfortably. While the highest tower of Basel Minster is just 67 meters high and Freiburg manages at least respectable 116 meters, the northern tower of Strasbourg reaches up to 142 meters, more than double the height of Basel, making it not only the highest tower of the 3, but also the highest tower completed during the Middle Ages that still stands today. It literally touches the sky. This is Strasbourg Cathedral in the early morning hours. However, being a French church, its actual full name is Cathédrale Notre-Dame de Strasbourg. Now, some of you might say, wait a second, Notre-Dame? Isn't that the one in Paris? Well, you see, the thing is, there are quite a number of churches in France, as well as French-speaking countries, that bear that name. When it comes down to it, all Notre-Dame means is that this church is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Like I told you in the introduction, all 3 of these churches are, meaning that if Basel Minster and Freiburg Minster would happen to be on French soil, they would be Notre-Dames as well. While it is true that the term Notre-Dame usually is associated with the one in Paris when it is used in everyday life, technically speaking, it does not refer to this particular one alone. If you wanted to make sure to do that, however, the correct designation would be Cathédrale Notre-Dame de Paris. So much for that. Back to Strasbourg. Here is a close-up of the main gate. It sure is an impressive one. As was the case with Freiburg, and used to be the case with Basel, a statue of Virgin Mary can be found on the center pillar. Above the gate, the famous rose window of Strasbourg Cathedral can be seen. But more on that later. Moving around to the left, the enormous height of the northern tower is hidden almost completely by perspective this close to the church. While Strasbourg features a twin tower facade, only the northern tower was ever built to its full intended height. A common sight among many churches that opted to go for this layout, especially in France. Moving along, the flying buttresses and buttresses come into view. Just like in Freiburg, they also serve to transport rainwater away from the roof, although at this angle it isn't at all easy to tell. We will have opportunity to get a better look later on. There's also a crossing tower. It can be seen at the left-hand side of the picture. The northern face of the transept is the next element to follow. Directly in front of us, its position marked quite clearly by the copper roof on top, one of the later additions of Strasbourg Cathedral, the Chapel of Saint Laurent. More famous is the Portal of Saint Laurent, which is located directly in front of the northern face of the transept. Unfortunately, it was undergoing renovations at the time of my visit, but I still want to address it. Thankfully, the print on the covering shows us what it looks like. While the transept itself has some Romanesque elements, the portal is Gothic flamboyant, the latest and newest Gothic style. Since we are in France now, it is time for me to point out that the French use a different system of classification as compared to the German-speaking areas. For, as in Germany and other German-speaking countries, usually there is only a distinction between three different types of Gothic style made: Early Gothic, High Gothic, and Late Gothic. In France, however, there are four categories: Gothique primitive, Gothique classique, Gothique rayonnant, and Gothique flamboyant. So we have a case of the style preceding Gothic architecture, which is Romanesque, coming together with the newest Gothic style, flamboyant, here. Having moved as far away from the northern tower as possible on this side of the church, while still able to see it, we might as well turn around and take another look. Although the proportions are still largely distorted by proximity, we can at least catch a glimpse of how high it is now, even if only vaguely. See that spot where the northern tower connects to the central part? This is just below half of the height total. Unfortunately, I can't show you any pictures of the back of the church, since it is connected to another building and therefore not visible from ground level. Instead, we will continue our visit here, directly opposite to where we just were. Therefore looking at the southern part of the transept, where an interesting transition can be seen. This side comes with the advantage of a wide plaza, allowing us to gain some distance, getting a more complete view. While the transept is clearly the oldest part visible, the higher nave already makes the jump to Gothic rayonnant, as does the side aisle. Mirroring the opposite side, there is also a newer chapel here, which was added later on. It is positioned between the side aisle and the section with the windows with the white framing. It can easily be identified by the more complex tracery in its windows. There is also a model of Strasbourg Cathedral close by. Models are always helpful in order to see specific parts of the building you otherwise couldn't, but mostly to offer a different perspective and better overview, which allows you to gain an understanding of the proportions of the different parts in relation to each other. With choir and transept being the oldest parts, they are also the lowest. Roughly speaking, Strasbourg Cathedral gets newer and taller as we move east to west. It balloons up, so to speak. The difference in height is considerable and makes it look somewhat irregular, almost like a disfigurement, a fate Freiburg avoided by rebuilding the choir in a newer style later. Viewed from ground level, however, this stark difference is less obvious. It does not subtract from the beauty of the cathedral in any case, at least in my opinion. Having moved around the entirety of the church, it is now time we enter. In order to do that, you have to go to the side portal on the left. They put a one-directional system in place. You enter to the left, you exit to the right. Very sensible, considering the large number of tourists visiting the site. The left portal leads directly into the left side aisle. The tympanum, that's the semi-triangular decorative wall surface directly above the entrance, showing scenes from the childhood of Jesus, including the massacre of the innocents, the execution of all male children in Bethlehem, on order of King Herod. Looking across the entire length of the left side aisle, we can see two Romanesque round arches on the far side, further proof for the development we already saw on the exterior. However, the first thing you would probably notice upon entering the building is how dark it is inside. It is the darkest of the three churches we visited. I love it, but it makes taking pictures difficult. As a matter of fact, most pictures of the interior you will see are from my second attempt. The reason for the lack of light is actually a quite terrific one. Do you have an idea? Well, we will explore it as we walk down the aisle towards the choir in any case. If you didn't have a clue before, you probably do now. Yes, all windows of Strasbourg Cathedral are stained glass windows, allowing for little light to pass through. Even the triforium has them. While there are some windows left from medieval times, those are but few. The majority is far newer. You might also notice that the windows most to the left are somewhat incomplete, especially the one on top. The triforium directly below is also affected, as it turns into a pseudo-triforium on the outer left section. However, the explanation for that will have to wait for now. Let's focus on the pipe organ first, for it is quite remarkable. This type of pipe organ is called swallow's nest organ due to the way it is attached. What makes it special, decorations aside, which are magnificent, is the fact that the casing is a surviving Gothic style casing from the Middle Ages, which is very rare. Most Gothic style casings around are from the Neo-Gothic period. Now, how do I know this one is the real deal? Well, for one, Wikipedia states it and also contains an unrelated picture showing the interior of Strasbourg Cathedral in 1617, in which the very same casing can be seen. Passing the pipe organ, looking back towards the western facade, we can now get a sense for the height of the vault, which is 32 meters high, the highest of all we have seen so far. Although among the lower ones of the large cathedrals of France, we are at least in the ballpark. Most eye-catching is Strasbourg Cathedral's famous rose window. With 13.6 meters diameter, it is not only the largest stained glass window in this church, but among the largest in the world. Turning towards the choir again, dimensions decrease, as we have already noticed. Also, it gets darker still. This is particularly obvious in the transept, as can be seen here with the northern part, which is just about visible left to the massive pillar in the center of the picture. But before we take a closer look at that, we will move further to the left still to visit one of the side chapels. This is the chapel of St. Laurent, as seen from the left side aisle. If you look at the ceiling, comparing the walls, you can already tell that the one of the chapel is more advanced. Let's enter and get a better view at it. Here we are, and it is a more complex structure indeed. A Leeren vault as opposed to the four-part vault we saw outside. Furthermore, the windows are flamboyant style, while the ones in the side aisle are Rhine. And on top of it all, there is a Renaissance altar piece. Moving back out again, looking at the chapel and the northern transept at the same time, we can see why this place is so dark, for the windows are much smaller than in the rest of the church. The fact that there are not as many is probably not helpful either, but you do not have to be an expert to notice that this section looks particularly rough. The windows, the vault, the stonework in general, all bearing witness to the age of the northern transept. Turning back, the southern transept has the same thing going on, but to a lesser degree. Even looking from the other side of the crossing, you can already tell that, despite being dark still, there is more window space over there. You can also catch a glimpse of the astronomical clock, one of the famous sights Strasbourg Cathedral has to offer. While we are here, I would also like to apologize for the lack of content concerning the crossing dome, the choir and the apse. As you can see, the crossing dome was undergoing repairs at the time of my visit. As for all the rest, I am visiting the church just like any other tourist would, meaning the same restrictions apply to me. Therefore, I am not allowed to enter the northern transept nor the choir. I was also limited by the hardware I had available at the time. I have made an upgrade by now, but it was not available to me back then. Please keep that in mind. Staying in the same spot, turning right, we are now at a 90-degree angle to the nave, looking at the opposite side. As we have already noticed by looking at the exterior, there also is a later chapel over there, mirroring the situation on the side we just explored. While its vault is barely visible from over here, the windows can be identified as Gothic flamboyant ones. They are surrounded by the Gothic Rhine ones of the clear story above and the ones of the side aisle to the right, being identical in style. To the far left, the Gothic primitive windows of the transept, which is where we will be heading next, for the southern transept is accessible. Therefore, the position we will move to is roughly where you can see those two people standing right now, only that we will be facing left. But before we do that, here's a quick look back across the entirety of the nave towards the western facade and the rose window for you to enjoy. Luckily, there's a single man sitting there, giving you a sense of scale. One thing you might notice by looking at this is the fact that, despite having a higher vault than Freiburg Cathedral, Strasbourg is actually shorter. Returning our attention to the transept, like stated before, we see two Romanesque round arches directly ahead at floor level, leading further into the structure. Once again, this area is off limits to visitors. But not to worry, there are still plenty of things to see, like that pillar to the right and the clock already mentioned earlier. But before we do that, I would like to direct your attention to something you would otherwise totally miss: the floor grid ahead. I do not know if this was intentional or just happened to occur over time, but by the looks of it, this apparently turned into the wishing well of Strasbourg Cathedral, if you will. Now, why am I showing you this? Because I like bling? Well, I do actually. But this is not the reason, for there is at least one fact we can take away from this concerning the visitors. Being the famous site that it is, Strasbourg Cathedral is visited by people from all over the world. There are, of course, a lot of Euros, which does make it difficult to differentiate the various European visitors, since only the coins are different, while the bills are exactly the same. But there is more variety to it than just that. For example, to the upper left there is an orange bill, easy to spot, which is from Switzerland. I have to admit that there are a lot of currencies in there I'm unable to identify. Some look Asian, others Arabic to me, but I can't be sure. If you happen to recognize any of them, please let me know. However, I am pleased to also see some sweets in there, for there are, at the very least, 2 pieces of candy and 1 lollipop. Chupa Chups apple. Those are delicious. Furthermore, some bottle caps seem to have found their way in as well, which is quite funny. What's so funny about that, you may ask? Well, maybe it's childish, but the idea of some tourist running around being unable to close their bottles any longer does make me smile. Back to the cathedral. Here finally a proper shot of what the southern transept looks like up close. It is dominated by the pillar of angels in the center. A most beautiful piece indeed, showing the 4 evangelists and 8 angels above. Judging from what I know about medieval churches by now, I would assume these statues used to be painted. If you are looking at the angel bottom center, it sure seems like there are still traces of paint left on his face and hands. It is an awe-inspiring sight in any case, as the pillar of angels rises before us, stretching towards the heavens. Surrounded by stained glass windows on 3 sides, it casts a visible shadow at the right-hand wall, due to being particularly illuminated. Whoever put these lights in place knew exactly what he was doing. Congratulations on a job well done. Visiting the astronomical clock next, we have yet another magnificent piece of craftsmanship before us. Like I mentioned before, measuring the flow of time has always been one of the most important functions of a church. Not only does this clock do so with impressive precision, considering the time of construction, but also in remarkable detail. While the current clock was built between 1838 and 1843, earlier iterations, of which there were 2, date back as far as 1354. Moving from top to bottom, the first display shows the phases of the moon. Below we see the positions of the planets, starting with the Sun in the center, followed by Mercury, Venus, Earth and Moon. After that, Mars and Jupiter follow, and finally Saturn. All planets visible to the naked eye and therefore known since antiquity. Below that, much smaller, you can see what most people would consider to be a regular clock. But even this one is not as simple as you might think. Taking a closer look, you can see that instead of 2 hands as you would expect, it actually has 4. 2 pairs to be more precise. 1 silver, 1 golden. With the silver hands displaying Central European time and the golden ones mean solar time. As far as the large display at the very bottom is concerned, this appears the most complicated of them all. It features a 2 times 12 hours display to start with, showing true local time, sunrise and sunset, as well as the position of the moon in relation to the sun. Apparently, even the axial precession of Earth is displayed. Naturally, every mechanical clock like this is, essentially, a calculator. But this one really seems to go all the way. Probably more interesting to the casual observer is the fact that some of the figures move. If you are willing to wait for the right time, you can observe them doing their little dance. An event most enjoyed by the countless tourists visiting the place. Speaking of visiting, sadly ours is nearing its end already. But don't you worry, I have not forgotten the chapel I mentioned earlier, and we will take a quick look at it now. It is called the Chapel of St. Catherine and bears a large crucifix at the front. Here's a picture from the inside looking up, showing some of the stained glass windows and the vault. Contrary to the Leeren vault we saw in the opposing chapel, the chapel of St. Catherine has a Schlingrippengewölbe. Apparently the closest translation is curvilinear vault. The ceiling in between is decorated with stars. Although quite common in church decoration, this is the only part of Strasbourg Cathedral where that is the case. There are also two Gothic altar pieces present in here. Parts of them can be seen on the left-hand wall and to the upper right, close to the central pillar. However, I leave it to you to explore those yourself, should you ever happen to visit. The last artifact I would like to show you in here is the statue. Now, if you happen to know anything about France at all, you should be able to determine who this is. Any guesses? Right, it is, of course, no one less than Joan of Arc herself. Leaving Strasbourg Cathedral, we pass this conveniently located souvenir shop. But our visit is not over yet, for we will climb the tower next. But since the entrance is only accessible from the outside, we need to exit first anyway. Now, everything we have seen so far can be visited without any cost whatsoever. But just like in Basel and Freiburg, climbing the tower requires a ticket. A fee of 8 euros must be paid in order to get one. I still recommend it, of course. It is well worth it, if you ask me. But judge for yourself. Once again, the staircase is very narrow. That aside, it is the most pleasant climb so far. This is due to the fact that you take the south tower going up and the northern one going down. Meaning there will be no one coming your way as you do so, which helps quite a lot. Of course you should not be afraid of heights, at least not overly so, for there are some parts where you are moving along on the outside. Like this one, for example. I've seen people coming up to this point and visibly shying away when they got there. It all depends on your level of sensitivity, of course. But whatever the case, at Strasbourg you can at least afford to be somewhat afraid of heights. Even have vertigo, but there is no realistic way you could actually fall off the building. As opposed to Basel, the route is very well secured. Look at this overhead steel railing, for example. It locks you in completely. At Basel Minster, it would simply not be present. Here is why climbing the tower is such a crucial part of a visit to a cathedral like Strasbourg. Yes, the view is very nice, but more importantly, it enables you to observe the structure at different levels of height. An option that becomes even more important as the church in question increases in size. As you can see, it is easy to tell now that the flying buttresses are indeed used to direct rainwater away from the building, since the copper channels are clearly visible from up here. It also allows for a complete view of the roof of the side aisle. A hip roof to be precise, which is impossible to tell for sure from ground level. True, you could get that information from the model as well, but seeing it for yourself, on the real building no less, has a quality of its own. The type of roof on the side aisle also explains why Strasbourg can have a triforium with windows, since this particular shape allows for it. In contrast to Freiburg, whose side aisle employs a shed roof. As you may recall, Freiburg Cathedral does not have a triforium anyway, but even if it did, it could not be one having windows. As for the roof directly next to the one of the side aisle, it's the chapel we visited last. I guess this picture explains my prior statement, why it is still advantageous not to be afraid of heights when coming up here, best. As the view from the staircase can be intimidating. Being able to feel the wind on your skin further enhances the experience. Having climbed all the way up, you arrive inside that little house over there on top of the southern tower. There are various info panels and clips inside containing information about the history of the cathedral. Note how spacious it is. This is quite unusual, especially for a medieval church. But since Strasbourg's creators decided to connect the southern and northern tower by building an additional platform in between, there's plenty of space. Here's a look at one of those panels. It shows how Strasbourg Cathedral was originally supposed to look. The planned facade is the one on the left, the one actually built on the right. Let's expand on that somewhat, shall we? In order to do so, I added a picture of Notre-Dame de Paris on the right hand side and made it as true to scale as I could. My apologies for the low resolution of the Notre-Dame de Paris picture. It was the only public domain one I could find at the time that was suitable. While definitely the smaller church in length and volume, the western facade of Notre-Dame de Strasbourg can easily keep up with Paris, if not more. I for one actually prefer it. Sure, it is a bit smaller, but not by much. Also, we are only talking about height and width here. If you account for an additional middle section, the surface area is probably larger and, more important, much more detailed. For if we stick to comparing the two facades alone, Paris actually is the older one, thus featuring an older, less elaborate style of Gothic architecture. Gothic primitive, as opposed to Strasbourg's Gothic rayonnant. In this aspect, Strasbourg is more than a match for Paris. And we don't even have accounted for the Northern Tower yet, which far eclipses everything Paris has to offer. If we remove said Northern Tower, as well as the middle section, which wasn't part of the original design anyway, things get a lot more even. Now Strasbourg looks a lot more like what you could consider the classical shape of a typical French Gothic cathedral. Moving away from the panel and our little thought experiment, it is time to get real again and enjoy the moment. Here is the westward view from the visitors' platform, roughly westwards at least. For just like Basel, Strasbourg has not exactly been built on an east-west axis, only very approximately so. Looking directly down, we can get a good sense for the height we are at. It's about 66 meters, more or less the same as Freiburg and even Basel. Albeit the smallest of the three churches by far, Basel compensates for it by allowing you to climb its towers to a higher point than the other two. The viewing platforms of most churches are roughly at this height, but there are some exceptions, Cologne Cathedral being one of them. As for Strasbourg Cathedral, moving to the opposite side of the viewing platform offers an excellent view at the main body of the church. Nave, side aisles, both chapels, transept and crossing tower are all visible. The choir alone is missing. With this picture, it feels like the time has come to address the matter of the roof as well, which is made from bronze, making it utterly unhistorical. In ancient times they used wood. However, I have heard that there was a law passed at some point within the Holy Roman Empire allowing only for ceramic or stone roof tiles to be used. Apparently this was done in order to diminish the risk of fires at least somewhat. I don't have any source to substantiate that though, so I can't tell for sure. Please keep that in mind. That being said, I very much doubt any church received a bronze roof during the Middle Ages. I can't imagine they would have been able to afford it. Now that we have made it all the way up here, we are at least able to view the Northern Tower from up close. Perspective sure is a funny thing, for it makes the tower seem way smaller than it actually is. Remember, this thing is just as high as the platform we are standing on, with a couple of meters added on top. Sadly, we can't climb it. It used to be possible, but that was way before my time. We have to enter it anyway though, for it is our way back down. As we approach the tower, numerous inscriptions stand out that don't seem to be part of the design itself, and indeed they aren't. For a time, stonemasons earned an additional income by sizzling the names of visitors into the stone for a fee. Apparently Hewig from Basel was here in 1832. Rumor has it that Voltaire's name is here as well, but if that's true, I do not know. At least I haven't been able to find him. But I did find someone else. Can you spot him? It's a famous German writer, starting with a G. Pause the video and take your time if you like. Otherwise I will tell you. Are you done? Alright. The name is visible on the left side, somewhat above the middle. It's Goethe. Full name Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. We are now inside the tower, looking up. As you can see, this thing is basically completely hollow. I'd love to go up further and show you the rest of it, but like I mentioned, unfortunately this is not possible for me to do. Having reached the highest point, there's only one direction to go. Down. This is the way. Having begun the descent, we are now in the perfect position to answer a question I laid out to you shortly after we entered the cathedral. The question why those windows and the triforium seemed incomplete. It's actually quite simple. It's where the supports for the tower are, therefore it has to be solid. As for the window, one step higher, the one with no glass involved whatsoever and only blind tracery, that's where the pipe organ is located. I don't know how much the thing weighs, but it can't be light. Beyond anything a window can support in any case, therefore there needs to be wall. At last we are back on the ground again. This is where you exit a staircase. If you pay attention, you can see another person in there coming down. Of course, now that we made it all the way down, the weather's finally starting to clear. I hope you take it as an incentive to visit the place yourself one day. It sure is worth it. This completes our journey, and indeed this video, Gothic at the Upper Rhine. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you found it interesting, maybe even entertaining. If either, or maybe even both, is the case, consider liking, subscribing and sharing. It is greatly appreciated and will help me to create more content like this in the future. Take care and see you on the next one.